Turn your Bibles this evening to Ecclesiastes chapter number 2. Ecclesiastes chapter number 2. So last week we're in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, where Solomon used his wisdom to get to know things particularly about creation and about life. But keep in mind, the wisdom that he used was wisdom apart from the existence of God, wisdom apart from eternity, where there will be rewards or consequences to how life is lived. And in the end, exercising the wisdom that God had given him, he came to the conclusion that all is vanity and vexation of spirit, or vexation of spirit. And if I summed up chapter 1, it would be something like this. Solomon struggled with viewing purpose in life. It just didn't matter how you spliced exercising wisdom to understand life, he just didn't view purpose in life if there is no God or if there is no eternity. And that same thought process, in that same line, we read in Ecclesiastes chapter 2, I said in my heart, go to now, I will prove thee with myrrh, therefore enjoy pleasure, and behold, this also is vanity. And he goes on to explain why this is vanity. I said of laughter, it is mad, and of myrrh, what doeth it? I sought in my heart to give myself unto wine, yet acquainting my heart with wisdom, and to lay hold on folly, till I might see what was that good for the sons of men, which they should do under the heaven of all the days of their life. I made me great works. I builded me houses. I planted me vineyards. I made me gardens and orchards, and I planted trees in them of all kinds of fruits. I made me pools of water, to water therewith the wood that bringeth forth trees. I got me servants and maidens, and as servants born in my house. Also I had great possessions of great and small cattle, above all that were in Jerusalem before me. I gathered me also silver and gold, and the peculiar treasures of kings and of the provinces. I gat me men singers and women singers, and the delights of the sons of men as musical instruments, and that of all sorts. So I was great, and increased more than all that was before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me. And whatsoever my eyes desired, I kept not from them. I withheld not my heart from any joy, for my heart rejoiced in all my labor, and this was my portion of all my labor. In other words, everything that he had accomplished was his portion in all his labor. He says in verse 11, and then I looked on all the works that my hands had wrought, and on the labor that I had labored to do, and behold, all was vanity and vexation of spirit, and there was no profit under the sun. And in these first 11 verses, we find a few things about what King Solomon did. He experimented with the wisdom that God had given him. He experimented in two ways. First, he experimented to see what value is there in life if you just amuse yourself. And that's verses 2 and 3. He says, of laughter, it is mad, and of myrrh, what doeth it, or what it is accomplished with myrrh. He says, I sought my heart to give to wine, and I acquainted my heart with wisdom, and lay hold on folly, till I might see what was that good for the sons of men, which they should do under this heaven all the days of their life. He wanted to know what life was like if all you had was fun. Now what is interesting is this, is on one hand, he says in Ecclesiastes 2:2, I said of laughter, it is mad. Yet in Proverbs chapter 17, verse 22, he says, a merry heart doeth good like a medicine. It isn't that Solomon is now, what is the word? Bipolar? Not bipolar. Maybe it is bipolar. I don't know. Schizophrenia. It's not that he's schizophrenia, where he's one person in Proverbs and he is thinking a different way in Ecclesiastes. Keep in mind, many of the Proverbs that were written, if not all the Proverbs that were written with the idea that God is central. There is an eternity. But Ecclesiastes was written with the idea that God isn't there and eternity doesn't exist. And so Proverbs chapter 17, verse 22, a merry heart doth do good like a medicine if you keep in mind there's God. and there is eternity. However, in Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse 2, you have to keep in mind that he's exercising these activities in view of, does God really exist? And he says laughter is just folly. It really, when you think about some of the commercials that you see on TV, or even advertising you see on billboards or newspapers or online, they make life so fun, right? So thrilling. A lot of laughter. When I was a kid growing up, I forget which beer company it was, but it was light beer, and you had all these former football players, tastes great, less filling, whatever it was. But what they did was they made life out to be fun. This is the best of life. When you get to go with your friends and drink and get drunk and just live life large. And living life large, it brings about this sadness and madness. I know a person, this person's in their 20s. This person wants to have fun with their life. That's all they want to do. This person goes to church, but this person doesn't want authority. This person doesn't want responsibility. All this person wants is to have fun. Wants to go on trips. Wants to experience new things. This person just wants to have fun. And though this person's in her 20s and she's having all sorts of fun, there's going to come a time. It could be next week, next month, or 10 years from now. There will come a time when this person realizes how much they've wasted just having fun. And so first, he gives us wisdom to have a good time, to laugh, to party it up, if you will, to go from one good time to another good time, to go from one club to another club, if you will. And he realized it's just madness, and it doesn't really accomplish anything. Then he gives his wisdom over to accomplishments. And he lists a series of accomplishments beginning in verse number 3 all the way down through verse number 10. Just a series of accomplishments. The accomplishments he had, probably, I don't know if very many people have ever experienced these kinds of accomplishments. In fact, he says, if you remember in chapter 1, he says, no one in Jerusalem has ever had the wisdom that I've had. And then in Ecclesiastes chapter 2, he says, no one has ever had the possessions in Jerusalem like me. So he's the smartest person Israel had to offer, and now he's the wealthiest person that Israel had to offer. And he had servants and maidens, he had pools, and he had trees, he had gardens, he had orchards, he had vineyards, and he had many houses, he had silver and gold. He had singers and musical instruments. He would have had an amazing orchestra or band or musical group. And whatever his eyes looked upon, he was able to get. And so he had all these accomplishments. And in the conclusion, he said, then I looked on all the works that my hands had wrought, and on the labor that I had labored to do. And behold, all was vanity and vexation of spirit. There was no profit under the sun. The rest of this chapter, I think, helps us to understand how he came to those two conclusions. One on amusement and another on accomplishments. Let's pick up the reading in verses 12 through 17. And it gives us maybe 3 or 4 reasons. First reason, in verses 12 through 17, and I turned myself to behold wisdom and madness and folly. For what can the man do that cometh after the king? Even that which hath already been done. Then I saw that wisdom excelleth folly, as far as light excelleth darkness. The wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walketh in darkness. And I myself perceived also that one event happeneth to them all. Then said I in my heart, as it happeneth to the fool, so it happeneth even to me. And why was I then more wise? Then I said in my heart, that this is also vanity. For there is no remembrance of the wise more than of the fool forever. Seeing that which now is, in the days to come, shall all be forgotten. And how How dieth the wise man? As the fool. Therefore I hated life, because the work that is wrought under the sun is grievous unto me, for all is vanity and vexation of spirit. And so what he discovers is this: regardless of what he accomplished, even if he accomplished using the wisdom that God gave him, if he had legitimate accomplishments, and that's what we see in verses 4 through 11. He says all the profit is just vanity and vexation of spirit. The first reason he comes to that conclusion is it doesn't matter if you're wise, and he makes the point, wisdom is better than foolishness, as different as light is from darkness. But he says the reason there is no profit under the sun is because no matter how wise you are or how foolish you've been, we all end up in the same place. We all die. We all end up in the grave. Doesn't matter if a person who's foolish lives to be 50 and a person who's wise who lives to be 100. Both people will end up in the cemetery. Both people will be dead. And this really was grievous for King Solomon to think about for two reasons. One is, he says, is because that there will be no remembrance of the wise any more than there is of the fool. I mentioned this last week. Many Americans today don't know who were some of the greatest inventors in life, just in American history. It's been forgotten. Their names have been forgotten. And so there will be no remembrance of those, but not only that, he says the wise man and the fool man died the same. And so he doesn't see any reward. If God doesn't exist, and if there isn't any eternity, there aren't any consequences to life, he sees no value of being wise more than he sees of being foolish, because in the end, you both end up dead. And no one will remember you any more than no one will remember a foolish person. Therefore, he says, I hated life, because the work that is accomplished under the sun became grievous. That's a strong statement, right? To hate life. The second reason he comes to the conclusion that all of his accomplishments are without profit and they're just vanity and vexation of spirit is, notice beginning in verse number 18. Yea, I hated all my labor which I had taken under the sun, because I shall leave it unto the man that shall be after me. And who knoweth whether he shall be a wise man or a fool? Yet shall he have rule over all my labor wherein I have labored. And wherein I have showed myself wise under the sun, this is also vanity. Therefore I went about to cause my heart to despair of all the labor which I took under the sun. For there is a man whose labor is in wisdom, and in knowledge, and in equity. Yet to a man that hath not labor, therein shall he leave it for his portion. This also is vanity and of great evil. For what hath man of all his labor, and of the vexation of his heart, wherein he hath labored under the sun? For all his days are sorrow, and his travail grief. Yea, his heart taketh no rest, and the night, this is also vanity. So the first reason is because the wise man and the foolish man, they will die. No matter how long they live, no matter the accomplishments, even though there are seismic differences between the two, they both end up in the cemetery. The second reason is he fears that all the accomplishments that he has made, he'll give it to someone who's less wise than he. And if you have read that portion of the Bible, you know his son Rehoboam took over the throne upon his death and was not nearly as wise as his father. And so death really seems to be the thought process of Solomon. And I don't think it's outside of the ordinary for someone who's older in their life to come to grips with just how short life is. I was at this Bible conference, and some of the people that I met 2 or 3 years back at the last time they had the conference were healthy and strong and vibrant. And today they're dealing with cancer or have had serious health issues that have, and some have even crippled them. When you're there, you can just see how short life is and how temporary life is. And what really bothered Solomon wasn't just dying, it was how that he's going to leave all of his possessions to someone who may not respect the possessions as he did, someone who doesn't have wisdom. In a way, he says, I'm going to leave all my possessions to someone who hasn't done anything to earn it other than they were my son. This is the second reason. Notice the third reason, beginning in verses 24 and 25. There is nothing better for man than that he should eat and drink, and that he should make his soul enjoy good in his labor. This also I saw, that it was from the hand of God. For who can eat, or who else can hasten hereunto more than I? The third reason he viewed that there's no profit under the sun. If you view life without God, if you view life without eternity, all there is to do is just to eat and drink. It's to make the best of a horrible situation. There's nothing that you can do. Just make the best of a horrible situation. And it is said, and I don't know how true this is, in part because I never really looked at it, nor have I ever experienced it, but it is said that the busiest day for bars in America is the night before Thanksgiving, where people just want to, maybe many of the people, maybe not all, but many of the people just want to get drunk so they can forget their miseries. Maybe their loneliness, their disappointments, their depression, because that's the best you can do with an awful situation if there is no God. And then notice the last thing, verse 26. For God giveth a man that is good in his sight wisdom and knowledge and joy, but to the sinner he giveth travail, to gather and to heap up, that he may also give to him that is good before God. This also is vanity and vexation of spirit. Verse 26, in short, just speaks of redistribution of wealth. It is interesting today that how many people in our political arena view rich people as the wealthy, rich people that have accomplished much as the evil people, and the people that are in poverty, maybe generational poverty, as the innocent victims, right? Just weird how that works, because in a way that's what you see, at least that's what I see in verse 26. Who the good is and who the sinner is, it's relative to however I guess you want to define it. And maybe this is Solomon's point, but redistribution of wealth just creates this vanity and vexation of spirit. And so here he is, he accomplished much for life, but in the end he's just going to be taxed more, because there's this circling of redistribution of wealth. So in this chapter, I do want us to consider something that is of utmost importance. Solomon takes us on this journey, right, of trying to experience life to its fullest, whether having fun or with accomplishments. And in both cases, he realized that there's no profit. It's just vanity and vexation of spirit. The main reason why in the following verses is because one day you're going to die. And whether you die as just like fools do, or you die and you have to give your wealth to someone who's unwise, who isn't going to appreciate what you've accomplished, whatever the case, it still links back to death. The person who lives their life without God will view death as an enemy. And I want that to sink in for just a moment. A person who has no cognizance of eternity, who doesn't know God, will view death as an enemy. Even the Apostle Paul puts it, right? About the resurrection of Jesus. How the resurrection of Jesus defeated one of man's great enemies, right? Death. Death had been swallowed up in the resurrection of Jesus. Thankfully, I don't believe anyone here is living life without God in their mind, or is living life with the rejection of eternity. But though we don't reject eternity, I do wonder if we live our life with eternity in our minds. because of death. I found that many Christians view death the same way Solomon does in Ecclesiastes 2, that it's a defeat. It's short-sighted, it's not understanding heaven, and it's probably being too attached to this world. Turn your Bibles for just a moment, I'll close with this, in Philippians chapter 1. And I want us to turn here and really just view these 3 or 4 verses, praising God that he has revealed himself to us. Praising God that we're not where many people are in this world. Because for Christians, death isn't a defeat. For Christians, death is this great gain. And Paul really spells this out clearly in Philippians chapter 1, beginning in verse number 20. Paul says, according to my earnest expectation and hope. What is Paul's overriding passion in life at this stage in his life? It is that in nothing I shall be ashamed, but with all boldness, as always, so now also Christ shall be magnified in my body, whether it be by life or death. His overriding passion for life, his earnest expectation and hope is that he is not ashamed of Jesus. He's not ashamed of or make Jesus ashamed. He wants to be bold towards his God. And he wants to magnify Jesus Christ in his body, whether through life or through death. Whether he's living or whether he's dying, what he wants more than anything else, he wants to magnify God in his life, in his body. With how he responds, he wants to magnify God. He goes on to say in verse 21, for, maybe I should just preface verse 21 by saying this. What he says in verse 20 is hefty. It's hefty in this sense because his one purpose is to magnify God, magnify God with his life, with his death. How does he hope to accomplish this? This is what Paul answers in verse 21. For to me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. He hopes to magnify Jesus in his body, whether through life, by living for Jesus, and in death, by viewing death as gain. I was in my 30s when I first viewed this text, and it was a rebuke to me. Because even though I knew I would be going to heaven, I didn't view death as gain the same way that Paul did. I viewed death as missing out on life here, missing out on the experiences of life here, missing out on walking my daughters down the aisle, missing out on seeing my son get married or experiencing grandchildren. So I viewed death in my 30s, if I had died in my 30s, as a great disappointment. And when I read this text, I was convicted by the Lord and rebuked, because no matter what stage of life I'm in, whether I'm in my teens, 20s, 30s, or 50s, death for the Christian is always gain. And Paul gives the reason why death for the Christian is gain. Notice he continues, but if I live in the flesh, this is the fruit of my labor, yet what I shall choose I want not. I don't know whether I want to live or die, Paul says. Whether I want to live or be a martyr in a way. And here's the reason he gives. For I am in a strait betwixt the two, having a desire to depart and to be with Christ, which is far better. The reason Paul viewed death as a gain was because he viewed being with Jesus as the best thing ever. And that's what really convicted me. I viewed experiences in life as superior than to being with Jesus. The good news for us Christians is we don't have to live life as shallow as as the people that Solomon describes in chapter number 2. We do have a hope, and that hope should be a driving passion of ours, to magnify God in our life with the bodies that he's given us and with whatever physical abilities our bodies have, as we live our life and in the dying process, to magnify God, to not be ashamed, so that we magnify God. And how do we get there with death? It's when we view Jesus Christ, being with Jesus Christ, as the best thing. And so you can see the difference between a Christian and someone who's a non-Christian, or a Christian and someone who's an atheist. This is the best life that a non-Christian has. Not to, well, maybe it is to slam Joel Osteen, but our best life isn't today. Our best life isn't now. If it is, then when you get to the end of life, you'll be just as miserable as the people that Solomon describes in chapter 2. Because you can't take your money with you. You can't take your accomplishments with you. Years ago, I remember reading the story of a person who died. He was an older person, wealthy person, if I remember correctly, an oil person from Texas. He had some kind of a special car. I don't remember the kind of car, but it was worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. He was buried in his car. It's silly. The car wasn't going to go anywhere. He can't take the car anywhere. But it just goes to show you how tied up he was in the wealth that he had. And so in the end, the conclusion of us, the conclusion of the matter in Ecclesiastes chapter 2 for us is, praise God, we're not them. Praise God, leaving this life for heaven is far better, because we'll be with Jesus Christ. Any thoughts on Ecclesiastes chapter 2? All righty. If there are no thoughts on Ecclesiastes chapter 2, just a thought, and I'll leave you with this thought. And you can answer it yourself when you get home. Do you find it, if you view death as, do you view death as the best outcome for the Christian, for you, because you'll be with Christ? And I pray that the Lord will maybe allow what Paul wrote in Philippians chapter 1, verses 20 through 23, and examine that with your own life and your own thought process. And if you don't, I pray that you will repent so that you can have a proper appreciation of heaven and being with Christ. And it would make your living this life much more enjoyable. With that being said, thank you for being here this evening. Let's close in a word of prayer.